Smith. Maybe a couple of seconds and I will.
Debate is an important element of progress.
Welcome to Evening Report's State of It program. Tonight we've got a special program in store for you. We'll cross live to Berlin to talk to journalist, author and Belarus expert Ingo Petz. But first, Belarus is in crisis. Weeks ago Belarus had elections, but the electoral fraud and corruption is expected after the country's dictator Lukashenko supposedly won 80% of the vote. Since then, Lukashenko's security thugs have sought to silence the people's desire for a true democracy. People have disappeared, many have been injured, and there have been deaths. Ingo will discuss with us why hundreds of thousands of Belarusians continue to protest in the streets undeterred. But first, here's an invitation to those of you who are joining us live. If you are joining us via Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, feel free to make comments. If you do, we'll be able to see these and see your interaction and include it in the program. But first, let's take a look at the run sheet for the show. Belarus with Ingo Petz. Why now? What's compelling hundreds of thousands of Belarusians to take to the streets to demand regime change? Comparisons. How has the old opposition transitioned into a new political and powerful movement? And has Belarus now got an opposition government in waiting? And people power. It facilitated the fall of the Soviet bloc. Can Belarus's dictator Lukashenko be removed from power? So, across to Ingo. Ingo, welcome to Evening Report.
Good morning from Berlin, good evening, and kia ora.
Kia ora there. Very good. I can see your pronunciation is still right on mark there from your time that you stayed in the South Pacific and certainly in New Zealand. Now, the situation in Belarus, Ingo, I know that you are being sought out by many in the mainstream media and also alternative media, radio and others as to what is going on in Belarus. Can you give us a general picture of the current situation?
Yeah, I mean, what at the moment the protests, I would say, it's not like 2-3 weeks ago when right after the day of the so-called election day, so the 9th of August, when the regime actually answered the protests with a lot of, with brutality, with horrible. Shooting flash grenades, rubber bullets at the protesters, especially the first 3 days after the 9th of August. So that because the regime, I think, it's expected to silence the protests quite immediately, like it was in the old times. So, like, for example, it's 2006 and 2010 when those kind of protests happened in Minsk, but. The regime probably didn't expect that the protests would evolve in a more dynamic way, and that the anger of the people actually would dramatically increase. And partly, of course, this is the fault of the regime because of the police brutality and the torture people had to face when they had been arrested in the Belarusian jails. So at the moment. The protests have changed a little bit. You could probably see, like, the last 2 Sundays, there were the biggest, I would say, demonstrations, protests ever in Belarus, all over the country. So especially
massive.
In Minsk.
I'll bring up on screen and see if we can illustrate this.
Yeah, you could probably see, like, especially in Minsk, like in the bigger cities in the west, Grodno, which is playing a huge role in the protests as well. Brest in the west. So hundreds of thousands Belarusians were protesting, and during the week, I mean, people have still to work, of course. So they organized protests on the main square in Minsk. So especially yesterday again, because yesterday was a national celebration day. It was like the the day of the Declaration of Independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the 25th of August. So again, yesterday we had thousands, 10,000 of people on the main square in Minsk. That's what's happening at the moment. At the same time, the so-called new opposition established last week the Coordination Council, which was an important step for the new opposition to create a kind of leadership and to show not only to the people protesting but also to the regime that they are ready to take leadership.
Let's pick up on that point, because obviously when there's a people's movement that is in action here, and there is a likelihood of regime change at some point, the pushback of which you were talking about from the regime, from Lukashenko's people, with violence, control, obviously, trying to actually oppress the people's wish here. With all of that, how is the opposition being regarded amongst what you may consider conservative Belarusians, who may think very good movement, very good ideals, but have they got what it takes to actually govern the country?
First I need to emphasize actually that these protests they differ vastly from the protests before. So I mentioned that before. So 2006-10, like the bigger protests in Minsk after the falsifications of the elections, where tens of thousands people gathered on the main square, like the October Square in Minsk. That was mainly like the typical urban elite and the old traditional party opposition, which has been created like after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But now, like people, it's really, I wouldn't even call it anymore a protest. It's a revolt against the regime, being fed like by the dissatisfaction of the people with the regime, with the mismanagement, with like the economic situation, with corruption, like.
And the COVID brought this to the fore, didn't it?
Yes.
Belarus under Lukashenko was obviously holding back information and denying that COVID was a problem, and yet I remember you reporting and putting it out to via various forms of media that the realities on the ground that the people were observing and experiencing were quite different from what their oppressive leader was actually saying.
Yeah, so this protest, that's an important point, like that the COVID crisis, like especially starting in May, when the regime, it was practically ignoring the crisis. So it was showing its like very, how do you say, like in English, inhumane face. So the president, even like Lukashenko, mocking at those people who has been affected with COVID or even died. So the people realized we can't rely on the government, on the state, on the regime anymore. So we have to do something about it on ourselves. And they created this self-organization, solidarity, which now feeds the protest as well. And this is why not only like the people in Minsk are protesting, so the intelligence, the old party opposition, it's like all over the country. It's coming from different social classes, different ages. Especially the regions have now stood up, which have been like in the past always a stable factor for the regime, for Lukashenko.
And so with this this whole movement that you're saying is moved to a point of a political party that is equipped and able to govern. Clearly, its leadership could have been regarded as not rock solid, in the sense that the aspirations of its leader, the husband of Svetlana, as she is so well known by her first name, she has had to pick up the baton, pick up the torch, and actually become the leader of the whole opposition movement. How is she faring, and why is she not able to be in the country?
That's the other, besides like the COVID crisis, that's the other thing what you mentioned. So Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, Marina Kolesnikova, and the wife of Tsepkalo, who was like a presidential candidate as well, but had to escape to Russia. Maria Kolesnikova, she was the head of the election campaign of Viktor Babariko. He has been arrested as well. So those women, so Svetlana, of course, because her husband, he wanted to become the presidential candidate. Sergei Tsikhanovsky is a famous video blogger, very critical in Belarus. He has been arrested as well. So those three women united, and that's the other factor, that actually the regime underestimated the power and the force of the dynamics coming from the women in Belarus. And when you know, like me, like Belarus for a long time, this is not really surprising, because the civil society, the cultural landscape, the media actually has been driven by very powerful female voices already in the past. So they united, and this unification, that was quite unique actually. As well to the opposition, because the old opposition, so I was talking about before, so those people could never actually agree on one candidate in a presidential election, and they had like the people thought that they were fighting always, so against each other, so
divided.
Yes, especially like Andrei Sanikov, Milinkiewicz,
Well,
the old nationalists, and so on. But now we go really deep into Belarusian issues.
So let's look at that transition in just a moment. But at first, let's look at the leader of the movement now that we've been talking specifically about. And she addresses the camera from her exile outside of Belarus at the moment. And this is a clip from Al Jazeera.
The figurehead of the Belarusian opposition, who fled to Lithuania, says she represents the majority and believes a peaceful revolution is underway.
It is neither an anti-European Union nor pro-European Union revolution. It is a democratic revolution. It is the striving of the nation to decide for itself.
The Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee echoed her call for the Belarus government.
What's standing out there for me, Ingo, is clearly she's indicating that the solutions to this whole crisis, they will come from within Belarus. They won't come from outside. And in a way, I guess, from all of these thousands of miles down in the South Pacific, it seems the message is pitched as much as anything to those who are leading the Russian Federation at this time, to say, we will sort this out, in a sense. Is that accurate? And also, once you address that point, let's go back, shall we, and have a look at where the protest movement came from, how it transcended to this point where it is, as you were saying, it is ready to pick up the baton and the responsibility and the burden of government.
First, you have to put yourself into the position of Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya. That's something I need to explain a little bit. Because, as I said, she picked up the role of the presidential candidate because her husband has been put to jail. So she was practically, and she said that by herself many times. She was like a simple housewife, so caring for her children, cooking, and all that stuff. So you have to imagine like the bravery of her taking on that role. That's the one point. The other thing is that she has obviously been threatened by the secret services, the regime. A couple of weeks ago, when she had been forced to leave the country. She had a psychological crackdown, I guess, what you could see like in the video when she was addressing the people, and then she had to escape to Lithuania. And now I think she understood that she said she is not like a political leader. That was something she said before all the time. She's just a symbol for the dissatisfaction of the people. So, but now she, and that's that shows her real strengths actually. Her husband is still in jail. So, and that she decided anyway that she now is ready to become the leader of that movement. And so, that's an interesting point, because the old opposition, it criticizes the new opposition, so especially those women, for not being experienced in politics, not being, especially under those really harsh conditions in a very repressive regime. But what I think is that like those kind of movements, they come up with their own political leaders, and they with their own political experience, and like the past, especially like in the end of the Soviet days of the Soviet Union, the communist bloc in Eastern Europe, and the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia, and at that time, for example, has proven that those movements actually come up with their own political leaders.
Yes, Pavel, for example, down in the Czech Republic, that came through after the revolution down there. Let's have a look at the beginnings of the movement and a comparison. You touched on it there, a comparison of where the hopes were wrapped around opposition and the movement to where it has actually transformed to where it is now, and also the cultural expression of which seems to be reflecting the will of the people as well. And we're talking theatre, we're talking music, we're talking the arts in general, and posters that are starkly reminiscent of the art of the Eastern European kind of culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's something. I mean, a lot of people still have, like, especially like in the so-called Western world, democratic world, they still have like those pictures of the events on the Euromaidan, the Maidan in Ukraine and Kiev, starting at the end of 2013, on their minds, obviously, which evolved very brutally. More than 100 people were killed on the Maidan. So I guess a lot of people expected actually that the events or the protests would evolve in the same way, kind of, in Belarus, not taking into account, of course, that Belarus is a very different country. It shares, obviously, like the Soviet heritage with countries like Ukraine or Armenia, where the revolution was taking place like 2 years ago. But it's still a different country with different historical, cultural preconditions. So, and one of them is actually like what we call, or the Belarusians even call, like the partisan culture, which plays now a huge role in the protest culture. You are showing now like different, very creative posters being made by protesters in Belarus, or artists. So artists unite and do this kind of posters. Maybe you can go back to the first poster, Selvin, because there's the protests as such are very peaceful, and they're unexpectedly, surprisingly very peaceful, and they're very creative, and especially this. Well, there's a story behind this first poster.
Yes, tell us about this. This is fascinating, people. This is very interesting.
Yeah, it is. That was those two guys, young guys, you can see like on the poster. They were actually the DJs of a demonstration being organized before the 9th of August, so the election day, by those women, so Tsikhanovskaya and Kolesnikova, in Minsk. And those guys have been hired actually by state officials, so to suppress the demonstration with music, playing music loudly. So when the demonstration kind of at one point, they actually did the opposite thing. So they supported the demonstration. They put on actually a very famous song in the post-Soviet world, which is called Pyramid, which is also being written on the poster.
And that's change.
Change. Yeah, it means change. Here it is in Belarusian language, actually. And this song comes from a very famous Russian Soviet band. It's called Kino. Victor Soy, the singer, he's dead already, unfortunately, for 30 years.
And this song has become the icon for many in the movie.
Yeah. And that's linking that was linking the protests to the spirit actually of the perestroika and glasnost, so end of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
And people started in Minsk. They started singing this song very loudly when those guys played it, like during the demonstrations. And so they actually stood up, made those signs, the victory sign.
Yep.
Then they obviously have been arrested by the state officials and being sentenced to jail, I think both for 10 days. So it became kind of one of the symbols of the movement as well.
Yes. So in a way, the regime has overreacted with this type of thing. It's coming down with a heavy fist and the people are thinking,
Yes.
this just is not good enough. We will get our way, and the resolve is becoming more determined. From the point of view of what you were seeing on the ground, what's the interaction between Lukashenko's state apparatus and those that are occupying the streets of Minsk? 2 weeks ago, for example, we saw violent clashes. It is quite different now. There are larger numbers of people out there obviously saying, we demand change. But it seems as if from the footage and the reportage that the state's handle on the oppression is easing. Is that correct? And if so, it's not, no?
At the moment, I mean, the state, obviously, the government, the regime, it realized that coming up with that really brutal violence, it pushes the protests even more. So they stopped doing that kind of, and now they return to the old tactics. So taking out actually certain activists, putting them to jail. They did that with some members of the coordination council of Tikhanovskaya already. So Sergei Dilevsky, for example, he's the head of the strike committee at the tractor factory in Minsk, a very big factory with 16,000 workers. Then the other one being arrested is Olga Kovalkova. She is one of the heads of the Belarusian Christian Party, for example. So they are taking out actually that were they doing like in the old days, so to say, in the old protests, taking out certain people, activists, and to weaken weaken the protest, and on the other side to frustrate people, and to again raise or increase like the level of fear, because people, that's the other point of the protest. Obviously, people overcame their fear with the regime. So but because now it's a very fragile, dangerous situation.
It's closer to a knife edge, as they say.
Yeah, people don't know, are they going to succeed? What is happening if the protests are failing? Because then you would expect like a massive repression wave against those people being active in the protests, but also who have been very critically outspoken.
Yes.
So a lot of my old friends, they're my generation, so being born in the 70s, so they already took part in a lot of protests in the past in Belarus. They are very kind of optimistic on the one side because of the protests, the massive amount of people like on the streets still, but on the other side, of course, they know that Lukashenko can't be trusted, and that he probably wouldn't leave his post unforced.
Yes. So what I'm very much interested in, and I know it's you're very passionate about it as well, is to analyze the Belarusian people's response to the politics. So if we juxtaposition that to a degree, and we look at, for example, the positions that are coming out of Moscow, where they seem to be saying that negotiations need to occur, but that the council that the opposition has set up is not what Moscow would think is ready to negotiate. So what exactly is Moscow hinting at there? Are they saying, change is coming, Lukashenko's got to go, but they're trying to find some middle ground, or that the regime stays, but you get rid of the leader? What exactly is going on here, considering that, from the Belarusian people's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, that's very complex. You asked it before, and sorry that I didn't answer that, but every issue is quite a broad topic as such. So, as you mentioned, like those protests are not. It's about this dissatisfaction of the people with the regime. So they want new elections, fair elections. They want to get rid of the regime of Lukashenko. So the protests are not political at all. So they're not in favor of the European Union, for example, or anti-Russia. And this is a very important point. And you could, at the moment, you can see like, or in the past 2 weeks, that the Kremlin, I would say, Putin, I mean, Lukashenko said Russia sent some propaganda journalists to support them because their own propaganda journalists, like in the state television, they canceled jobs due to the protests and the violence. But nothing really has happened on the side from the Kremlin didn't really react, and that his hesitation, I think, is a proof for that Russia, the Kremlin, doesn't really know what to do at the moment, because obviously a military invasion wouldn't be a good idea at all from Russia's point of view, because of massive problems due to COVID at the moment, due to the economy in Russia, due to the wars and conflicts in Syria and Eastern Europe, also because of the dynamics in the Russian population, because a lot of people are also fed up with the Kremlin, with Putin.
With authoritarianism.
A lot of people didn't realize that, of course, but there were a lot of solidarity actions coming from Russia, especially from journalists, Russian journalists, from the Russian media, independent, from people from the cultural sphere, so musicians, writers, from the intelligence, and even from Russian football fans in the stadium. Yeah. So, and this must be like, that. I guess that makes the Kremlin very nervous at the moment. But the hesitation, so not really reacting to that, to the protests, what's going on, shows that doesn't really know what to do. So it's struggling with decisions.
And there's been no indication of movements on the border or anything like that you would see in preparation.
But like always in these times, like you have like a lot of anti-propaganda, like fake news, and there were like fake news about Russian the state guard has been sent to Belarus, but that's something we haven't talked about yet. But the Belarusian journalists media, they actually make a very good job under these very difficult conditions at the moment to verify all those fake news and the real news.
To fact check.
Fact checking. So that's the other thing. So Russia is obviously, it's because Belarus is economically, it's dependent on Russia, on the Kremlin. It's like the cultural ties. Symbolically, it has played like it's the buffer zone between the NATO states and the European Union. So the Kremlin obviously has no interest to lose Belarus. But on the other hand, due to the problems I explained before, but also because Lukashenko was not like to say like a very trustful partner for Putin and the Kremlin. Lukashenko always played like the game between the West, European Union, and Putin. So
we could see that playing out in the precursors to this. That it was almost as if Moscow was giving an indication. Well, you haven't been friendly to us in the past, so. We're giving you distance here, and you're going to feel the heat from your own people. If you were looking at from here, the resolutions, the solutions from the point of view of the Belarusian people, if I'm taking the messages correctly here, is that it must be resolved within Belarus, not from outside. So,
yes, that's
what is the defining moment that would indicate that there is a shift that takes place where the leadership of Lukashenko and the regime starts to actually lose grip of government? What would you be looking at, and how long is it? How far away is it on a timeline?
Okay, second question, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard to tell at the moment. And one of the differences to, for example, the Ukraine always was that, you had like in Belarus, you have a very consolidated regime structure. So the power vertical, the secret service, the police, the so-called chinovniki, so in Russian, like the state authorities, officials. So, and the opposition has no almost no way into those structures. So the point I would say, when it comes to a very severe erosion of the regime, is then when a lot of state officials are going to swap sides, and especially in the so-called Secret Service, police, in the Ministry of the Interior,
in the forceful arm
has,
of the regime. That's what you're looking for there, because you've had at least one person come across and start to engage, haven't you? From the point of view of engaging with the council.
Yes, I mean, there were already like news that police officers swapped sides, because of the brutality, especially in the first week, the torture, but not like in higher ranks. So, but the most famous state official, like a politician who swapped sides, is actually Pavel Latushka. He's now in the core group of the Coordination Council. He's the former cultural minister, so like around 10 years ago he was that, and now he has become like a very important symbolic figure of the new opposition as well. He actually, like Svetlana Alexievich, the Nobel Literature Nobel Prize winner, he has been called to interrogation as well for today. Which shows that. Which shows actually that the regime is very afraid that more and more important people from the regime would swap sides. And they try to pressure them, of course, and suppress these kind of dynamics. But that's coming back to Russia. That's something I wanted to mention before. I think. They're not stupid, so to say. We all know that it's about tactics and geopolitical tactics, and the Kremlin wouldn't support a weak Lukashenko, and Lukashenko is very weak at the moment, even though the regime hasn't eroded, like I said, that's dramatically yet, but. The people don't support him anymore, and that's a sign for the Kremlin. I guess they're now like checking out other ways how.
Could they work
to
with
get rid of Lukashenko and then like to accompany actually a new transition in their favor, kind of.
Could they work with Svetlana, for example?
Sorry.
Could they work with the opposition leader Svetlana?
That's hard to say. I don't know. There are rumors, there are a lot of rumors going on, especially coming from the old opposition as well. Like Tsepkalo, who was like the potential presidential candidate, but he fled to Russia. It's being said that he's got like stronger ties with Russia, with the Kremlin, but that's very hard to say at the moment. I would say the other thing is that people they have like now. They realize that spirit of freedom, and that they have become very self-confident now. And
because you were a young man when the Berlin Wall came down, and you were living in West Berlin at the time. So there must be parallels that you're observing here between what you observed in your youth and.
Yeah, of course. It's like with every democratic movement, coming, evolving. Like under the repressive regimes or in autocratic systems, people at one point realize that they want to decide for themselves, and so of course you can compare that with like the movements at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, but also like in Ukraine, like in the post-Soviet world, in Georgia, in Armenia 2 years ago, It just for the Belarusians it took a little bit longer, and that's due to different cultural. Historical reasons, because Belarus had never its own state that just started in 1991, and it was not like for Ukraine or the Baltic states that they really wanted this independent state. They just got it because of the historical conditions at that time, and it took like the Belarusians now for 25 years. Even for 30 years, 26 years since Lukashenko, to understand actually now it's time that we actually do our own thing, and decide our own fate.
On that point, Ingo, let's wrap it up for tonight. And let's hope that peace reigns in that part of the world very soon, and that the aspirations of the majority of the people are actually heard and observed.
Thanks a lot, Selvin. Yeah, that's something we really hope. My wife, she's from Belarus, and we are really intervened with Belarus for a long time already.
Yeah.
So we really hope it stays. It's not turning into a bloody crackdown again, and really should stay optimistic at that point, and have a little bit. If you have like on the others, and thanks for the interest actually, Selvin.
Oh, no,
It's a real help, actually, especially for Belarus and the Belarusians who haven't been heard for such a long time. And now if you have like a spare minute over there in New Zealand, just switch on the television, the good old one, radio, switch on like evening report, or like look in the internet and just follow the actions a little bit.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
that's something we need to do. We have our own problems in the democratic world, but I think that those people need our support, solidarity,
especially
at the moment.
Especially from a country that has a young female leader that is facing elections in about a month here in New Zealand, and what a difference that woman has made here to the politics and the culture. So on that note, there's hope and aspirations, and there is comparisons, that span the globe. Thanks for joining us, Ingo. Absolutely marvellous, and for bringing the Belarusian culture and also the situation right to us here. Thank you, and thank you to people out there for joining us tonight, and we look forward to you joining us again in a week's time. All the best. Take care.
Cheers.